The silence of the Horizon Research Station was different today. It wasn't the usual quiet of scientific concentration, but something heavier, a silence filled with anticipation and barely contained excitement. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood motionless, her dark eyes fixed on the object suspended in the zero-gravity containment chamber. It wasn't like anything humans had ever seen before. The artifact, if one could even call it that, pulsed with an inner light that seemed to breathe. Crystalline structures shifted and realigned themselves continuously, creating patterns that looked almost like thoughts taking shape. Its surface was neither solid nor liquid, existing in a state that defied everything Elena understood about matter. "Status report," she called out, her voice steady despite the racing of her heart. Dr. Akira Tanaka, the station's lead physicist, adjusted his glasses and checked the multiple monitors surrounding the containment chamber. "Readings are unusual," he said, his typically precise Japanese accent wavering with a hint of uncertainty. "The molecular structure is changing faster than our sensors can track. It's like the object is alive, but not in any way we've ever defined life before." Elena moved closer to the observation window. The artifact seemed to react to her movement, its internal crystalline structures swirling more rapidly. Blues and greens mixed with sudden bursts of amber, creating a mesmerizing dance of color and light. "Have we determined its origin?" she asked, knowing full well how little they actually understood. Marcus Chen, the youngest member of the research team, looked up from his console. At just 32, he was a prodigy in quantum mechanics and xenobiology. "Nothing matches our current database," he reported. "Spectral analysis suggests materials that shouldn't exist according to our understanding of physics. It's as if someone, or something, broke every scientific rule we thought was absolute." The artifact continued its mesmerizing dance. Every time a researcher moved, every time a light shifted, the crystalline structure seemed to respond. It was watching, learning, adapting. Elena remembered the day they discovered it. A routine deep space probe had detected an anomalous reading near the Kuiper belt. What seemed like a simple data glitch turned out to be the most significant discovery in human history. The object had allowed itself to be collected, almost as if it wanted to be found. "Communication attempts?" she asked, turning to Dr. Lydia Okoy, the team's xenolinguistics expert. Lydia shook her head, her intricate braids moving with emotion. "Nothing concrete. We've detected complex signal patterns, but they don't conform to any known communication protocol. It's like watching someone speak a language where you can see the movement of lips, but understand nothing." The artifact pulsed again. This time, the entire station seemed to vibrate slightly. Computer screens flickered. The overhead lights dimmed and brightened in a rhythm that felt deliberate. "It's responding to us," Marcus whispered, leaning forward. "But not randomly. There's intelligence here, calculation." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. They were being evaluated, studied, and the most terrifying part was that they had no idea by what or why. As if sensing her thoughts, the artifact's internal structure changed again. For just a moment, Elena could have sworn she saw a pattern that looked almost like an eye, watching, calculating, judging. First contact, she realized, might not be what humanity had always imagined. This wasn't about little green men or flying saucers. This was something entirely different, something that challenged everything they knew about intelligence, life, and their place in the universe. The Horizon Research Station hung in space, a tiny bubble of human curiosity surrounded by the infinite darkness. And inside that bubble, something extraordinary was about to happen. The first sign that something was wrong came 3 days after the artifact's initial observation. Dr. Elena Rodriguez noticed it during her routine morning systems check, a tiny, almost imperceptible irregularity in the station's communication systems. "Akira, come look at this," she called, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. Dr. Tanaka approached, his analytical eyes scanning the data streams. At first, nothing seemed out of place. But then, a pattern emerged. Subtle, deliberate, like a whisper hiding between the lines of digital noise. "It's not a malfunction," Akira muttered, more to himself than to Elena. "These are structured patterns, intentional." The artifact, still suspended in its zero-gravity containment chamber, pulsed softly. Its crystalline structure seemed to shimmer with an almost knowing rhythm. The research team had been meticulously documenting its behavior, but now it felt like the artifact was documenting them. Dr. Lydia Okoye entered the control room, her face pale. "You're not going to believe what happened during my night shift," she said, her voice trembling slightly. The team experienced shared hallucinations. Marcus Chen looked up from his console, skepticism written across his young face. "Shared hallucinations? That's not scientifically possible." Lydia pulled up a series of medical and psychological evaluations. 4 researchers reported the exact same vision: a landscape of impossible geometry, crystalline structures that moved like living thoughts, and a voice, if you can call it that, repeating a single message. The room fell silent. "What message?" Elena asked, her hand unconsciously gripping the edge of the console. "Proximity breeds consequence," Lydia repeated. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. The artifact pulsed again. This time, the lights in the control room flickered in perfect synchronization with its internal movements. Computer screens displayed random bursts of data, mathematical equations, fragments of unknown languages, complex geometric patterns that seemed to breathe and change. "We're being warned," Akira said quietly. But warned about what? Global communication channels began to buzz with speculation. The international scientific community was divided. Some researchers argued for continued study, believing the potential knowledge was worth any risk. Others demanded complete isolation of the artifact, fearful of potential consequences. Military advisors from various countries began to take notice. Classified briefings were held in secure rooms across multiple continents. The artifact was no longer just a scientific curiosity. It had become a potential global security concern. Marcus, unable to contain his scientific curiosity, began running increasingly complex analysis protocols. "The communication patterns," he said, excitement and fear mixing in his voice. "They're adaptive. It's like the artifact is learning our communication methods in real time." Elena watched the artifact. It seemed to watch her back. Another pulse, another whisper of data, another warning. "Proximity breeds consequence." The digital fragments seemed to repeat. But what consequence? And from whom? The questions hung in the air, as complex and shifting as the artifact itself. Outside the station's reinforced windows, space stretched into infinite darkness. The horizon hung suspended, a tiny bubble of human curiosity and fear, surrounding an object that defied everything they understood about intelligence, communication, and existence. Something was coming. Something was watching. And humanity was about to be tested in ways they could never have imagined. The night shift was always the quietest. Most researchers were asleep, with only a skeleton crew monitoring the station's systems. Dr. Marcus Chen preferred these hours. The silence, the solitude, the opportunity to think without interruption. But tonight was different. The artifact pulsed in its containment chamber, casting soft, undulating light across the empty research wing. Its crystalline structure seemed to beckon, to challenge. Marcus felt something he had never experienced before, a pull stronger than scientific curiosity. It was almost like a conversation happening just outside the range of human hearing. "Proximity breeds consequence," he muttered, repeating the phrase that had haunted the research team for days. His fingers hovered near the containment chamber's control panel. Regulations were clear. No direct contact. No physical interaction. But Marcus had never been one to follow rules blindly. Something in the artifact's movement changed. The crystalline structures aligned in a pattern that looked almost like an invitation, a challenge. One touch, Marcus thought. Just one touch to understand. The safety protocols were sophisticated, multiple layers of protection designed to prevent any accidental contact. But Marcus was a genius with computer systems. His fingers danced across the keyboard, overriding each security measure with practiced ease. The containment chamber's hermetic seal hissed open. For a moment, nothing happened. The artifact hung suspended in zero gravity, its internal structures swirling with mesmerizing complexity. Marcus leaned closer, his breath catching in his throat. Then he reached out. The moment his skin made contact with the artifact, everything changed. Energy unlike anything humans had ever documented exploded through the research station. Alarms blared. Emergency systems activated. The artifact's crystalline structures seemed to liquefy, then solidify, then transform in ways that defied every known law of physics. Marcus screamed. But it wasn't a scream of pain. It was a scream of revelation. His body began to change. Crystalline structures erupted from his skin, merging with his flesh. His neural pathways expanded, connecting with something vast and incomprehensible. Knowledge that had been hidden from humanity for millennia flooded his consciousness. In the control room, Elena Rodriguez and Akira Tanaka watched in horror through the reinforced observation windows. The containment systems had automatically sealed the research wing, trapping Marcus inside with the artifact. "What's happening?" Elena whispered, though she knew no one could answer. Marcus's transformation continued. His left arm became a complex lattice of crystal and flesh. His eyes shifted color, reflecting impossible geometric patterns. When he turned to face the observation window, Elena realized he was no longer entirely human. "My God," Akira breathed. "What have we done?" The artifact continued its intricate dance, now synchronized with Marcus's transformed body. It was no longer just an object of study. It had become something else entirely, a gateway, a communication device, a test. Outside the sealed chamber, the research station's systems continued to go haywire. Communication networks flickered. Computers displayed fragments of data that made no sense. Complex equations, alien symbols, glimpses of knowledge that human minds were never meant to comprehend. Marcus, or what had been Marcus, placed his newly transformed hand against the observation window. His eyes, now a swirling mix of human brown and crystalline blue, locked with Elena's. A message formed on the nearby computer screen, typed by no human hand. Kivaro xedem, that tybred is toenc. The first true moment of human-alien interaction had begun, and nothing would ever be the same. The sealed research wing became a world of its own, a space between what was known and what was possible. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood before the reinforced glass, watching Marcus Chen exist in a state that defied human understanding. He was no longer fully human, no longer fully the artifact. He was something else entirely. "Give me access," Elena demanded, turning to Dr. Akira Tanaka. "We need to communicate with him." Akira hesitated. The transformation they'd witnessed challenged everything they knew about biology, physics, and the nature of consciousness. Marcus's body now resembled a living hybrid, part human, part crystalline structured, shifted and breathed like a complex organism. "It's not that simple," Akira replied, his fingers dancing across multiple monitoring systems. "His neural patterns are extraordinary. We're detecting communication frequencies that don't exist in any known spectrum." Dr. Lydia Okoye approached with a stack of preliminary reports. Her dark skin was pale, her hands trembling slightly. "The preliminary analysis is impossible to comprehend," she said. "His brain is simultaneously processing information at quantum and biological levels. It's like he's become a bridge between two completely different forms of intelligence." Marcus, or what remained of Marcus, pressed his transformed hand against the observation window. Crystalline structures beneath his skin pulsed with a rhythm that seemed almost like a heartbeat. His eyes, now a swirling mix of human brown and alien blue, seemed to look through the glass rather than at it. A message began to form on the nearby computer screen. The letters appeared slowly, each character seeming to materialize from pure energy. Humanity is a potential, not a manipulation. Elena leaned closer. What does that mean? She whispered. The artifact, still present in the containment chamber, began to pulse in synchronization with Marcus's transformed body. The two seemed connected. No, more than connected. They appeared to be communicating in a language beyond human comprehension. We're not just observing a transformation, Akira muttered. We're watching a first contact scenario unfold in real time. Fragments of information began to cascade through the station's computer systems. Complex mathematical equations, glimpses of astronomical data from regions of space humans had never explored. Genetic sequences that seemed to combine multiple forms of life in ways that should be impossible. Marcus turned, his movements both fluid and mechanical. When he spoke, the sound was a combination of his familiar voice and something else, a resonance that seemed to vibrate through the very walls of the station. You are being evaluated, he said. The words carried multiple meanings, layered like complex music, not as individuals, not as a species, but as a potential. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. This was more than a scientific discovery. This was a test. Outside the station's reinforced windows, space stretched into infinite darkness. Somewhere out there, something was watching, waiting. What are we being tested for? Elena asked, her voice barely a whisper. Marcus's transformed body pulsed. The artifact shifted, and for a moment, the entire research station seemed to hold its breath. The CAPCT will to UND or stay and beyond your limitations. The message hung in the air, a challenge and a promise. Humanity's first true interaction with an intelligence beyond its comprehension had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. The world didn't sleep when news of the artifact first broke. But now, with Marcus Chen's impossible transformation, global communication networks erupted into a storm of panic, speculation, and raw, unbridled fear. In the United Nations emergency session, representatives from every major country crowded into the conference hall. Massive screens displayed the limited footage from the Horizon Research Station. Marcus, half human and half crystal, communicating in ways no one could fully understand. This is a threat, General Catherine Rodriguez, no relation to Dr. Elena Rodriguez, slammed her hand on the conference table. We need a military response. Immediate containment. Total isolation. The Chinese representative, Dr. Zhang Wei, disagreed. Containment is impossible, he argued. The artifact has already demonstrated capabilities that transcend our technological understanding. It's not just communicating, it's manipulating. Screens around the room flickered. Communication systems worldwide experienced sudden, inexplicable interruptions. Satellite networks became unstable. For brief moments, complex patterns of information would replace normal broadcasts. Mathematical equations, alien symbols, glimpses of something beyond human comprehension. Back on the Horizon Research Station, Elena Rodriguez watched the global response with a mixture of scientific fascination and growing concern. Marcus, or what remained of Marcus, continued to exist in his transformed state, a living bridge between human understanding and something entirely alien. We're being tested, Akira Tanaka said, watching the global communication networks destabilize. But tested for what? The artifact pulsed in its containment chamber. Crystalline structures moved with increasing complexity, almost like a living brain processing information across multiple dimensions. Every movement seemed deliberate. Every change, calculated. Dr. Lydia Okoye worked frantically, trying to decode the communication patterns. It's not random, she muttered, her fingers racing across multiple holographic interfaces. There's a structure, a purpose. Military leaders from around the world began preparing contingency plans. Some advocated for complete radio silence. Others wanted to attempt direct communication. A few radical groups even suggested preparing for potential conflict. But the artifact, and Marcus, seemed to be one step ahead. Communication networks started displaying synchronized messages, not in any single language, but in complex, multilayered information that could be understood simultaneously across different cultural and linguistic barriers. Humanity is a collective, not a division. The message appeared on screens worldwide, in government buildings, in research stations, in private homes, everywhere. Alina watched Marcus approach the observation window. His body was now more crystal than flesh, moving with a grace that was both beautiful and terrifying. When he spoke, his voice carried multiple tones, human and something else entirely. "You are being evaluated," Marcus said, "not as countries, not as separate entities, but as a single potential." The global tension reached a breaking point. Military forces were put on high alert. Scientific communities around the world worked around the clock, trying to understand the artifact's communication. But beneath all the fear and speculation, something else was emerging. A sense of collective wonder, a recognition that humanity might be facing its most significant moment of transformation. The artifact continued to pulse. Marcus continued to exist in his impossible state. And somewhere, in the vast darkness of space, something was watching, waiting, evaluating. Humanity's first true test had begun. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the center of a storm unlike any in human history. The Horizon Research Station had become more than a scientific outpost. It was now the focal point of humanity's greatest challenge. Marcus Chen, or the being that had once been Marcus, moved with an impossible grace. Half crystalline, half human, he approached the observation window where Elena watched, his eyes reflecting universes of information. "You are about to understand," Marcus said, his voice a complex harmony of human speech and something entirely alien. "The true nature of potential." A massive holographic display activated throughout the station. Complex diagrams began to form, intricate patterns that seemed to combine mathematical equations, biological structures, and something that looked like a cosmic blueprint. Dr. Akira Tanaka worked furiously at his console. "These aren't just images," he muttered. "They're a form of communication more complex than any language we've ever encountered." The artifact pulsed in its containment chamber, synchronized with Marcus's movements. Suddenly, the station's communication systems worldwide began to display a series of challenges. Not military challenges, not technological challenges, but something far more profound. The first projection appeared, a simulation of a global environmental crisis. Multiple nations were shown working together to solve a complex ecological problem. The challenge wasn't about individual survival. It was about collective action. "This is a test," Lydia Okoye realized, her voice barely a whisper. "Not of our technology, not of our military might, but of our ability to work together." More challenges appeared. Economic simulations that required global cooperation, medical scenarios that demanded shared research, technological problems that could only be solved through collective intelligence. The message became clear. Humanity was being evaluated not as separate nations, but as a single potential. Marcus moved closer to the observation window. His crystalline body shifted, revealing glimpses of complex internal structures that looked like living circuits of thought and possibility. "Isolation is limitation," he said. The words appeared simultaneously in every language on every screen worldwide. "Cooperation is potential." Global leaders watched in a mixture of fear and fascination. Military commanders found themselves unable to act independently. Scientific communities around the world began sharing information at an unprecedented rate. The artifact was forcing humanity to look beyond its divisions. Elena understood something fundamental was happening. This wasn't just a first contact scenario. This was a test of humanity's collective intelligence, its capacity for empathy, its ability to transcend individual limitations. "What are we being prepared for?" she asked Marcus. The response came not in words, but in a cascade of information. Glimpses of cosmic structures, hints of civilizations that had risen and fallen, a universe far more complex and interconnected than humanity had ever imagined. "You are children learning to walk," Marcus said, "before you can run with others." The challenges continued, each one more complex than the last, each one requiring more cooperation, more understanding, more collective thinking. Somewhere in the vast darkness of space, something was watching, evaluating, waiting. Humanity's greatest test had begun, and the prize was nothing less than a place in a larger, more complex universal community. The Horizon Research Station hung in space, a tiny bubble of human potential, about to be transformed forever. The world had never been more united or more terrified. 12 hours after the artifact's global communication began, humanity found itself facing a challenge that defied everything they understood about intelligence, cooperation, and survival. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the heart of the Horizon Research Station, watching as Marcus Chen, now a living bridge between human and alien consciousness, continued to transform. His body had become a complex network of crystal and flesh, moving with a grace that suggested something far beyond human physics. "We are offering a choice," Marcus said, his voice resonating through every communication system worldwide. "Not a threat, a possibility." The artifact pulsed in its containment chamber, projecting holographic challenges that appeared simultaneously in research centers, government buildings, and homes across the planet. Each challenge was a complex cognitive puzzle that required unprecedented levels of global cooperation. In Beijing, mathematicians worked alongside programmers from Silicon Valley. In Lagos, environmental scientists collaborated with engineers from Moscow. In Buenos Aires, medical researchers shared real-time data with colleagues in New Delhi. The challenges were intricate, not simple problem-solving exercises, but complex scenarios that tested the limits of human collective intelligence. One challenge involved solving a complex ecological restoration project that required simultaneous action across multiple continents. Another demanded a breakthrough in medical research that could only be achieved by combining knowledge from dozens of different scientific disciplines. Dr. Akira Tanaka monitored the global response, his fingers racing across multiple holographic interfaces. "It's not just about solving problems," he muttered. "It's about how we solve them." Lydia Okoye noticed something extraordinary. As teams around the world worked together, the communication patterns became more complex. The artifact seemed to be learning, adapting, responding to humanity's collective efforts in real time. "We're being studied," she realized. "Not just our intelligence, our capacity for empathy, our ability to transcend individual limitations." Marcus moved closer to the observation window. His eyes, no longer fully human, reflected complex patterns of information that seemed to shift and change with every breath. "Humanity's greatest strength is not individual brilliance," he said. "It is collective potential." Global communication networks began to display increasingly complex information. Mathematical equations that seemed to dance. Biological models that showed interconnectedness in ways never before imagined. Glimpses of cosmic structures that suggested a universe far more intricate than humanity had ever conceived. The challenges continued, each one more complex than the last, each one requiring more cooperation, more understanding, more collective thinking. Military leaders who had prepared for conflict found themselves collaborating with scientific teams. Political divisions began to blur as the global challenge demanded a unified response. Elena understood something fundamental was happening. This wasn't just a test of human intelligence. This was a test of human potential. "What are we being prepared for?" she asked Marcus. The response came not in words, but in a cascade of information. Glimpses of civilizations that had risen and fallen. Hints of a cosmic community far more complex and interconnected than humanity had ever imagined. "You are children learning to walk," Marcus said, "before you can run with others." Somewhere in the vast darkness of space, something was watching, evaluating, waiting. Humanity's greatest test had begun, and the prize was nothing less than a place in a larger, more complex universal community. The Horizon Research Station hung in space, a tiny bubble of human potential, about to be transformed forever. The moment arrived without warning. Global communication systems suddenly went silent. Every screen, every network, every digital interface displayed the same complex pattern, a crystalline structure that seemed to breathe with its own intelligence. Then, a challenge appeared. Not a request, not a suggestion, an ultimatum that would determine humanity's fate. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched in real time as the scenario unfolded. The Horizon Research Station became ground zero for humanity's most critical test. Marcus Chen, now more alien than human, stood at the center of the containment chamber. His body, a living network of crystal and flesh, pulsed with an energy that defied human understanding. "This is the moment of choice," he said, his voice resonating through every communication system worldwide. The challenge was deceptively simple, yet impossibly complex. A global environmental catastrophe simulation appeared. But this was no ordinary model. It required simultaneous, coordinated action from every nation on Earth. Complete strangers would need to work together. Governments that had been enemies for generations would need to set aside centuries of conflict. The timer began to count down. 12 hours. 12 hours to prevent a simulated global collapse that would destroy everything humanity had ever built. In Beijing, scientists who had never spoken to each other began sharing real-time data. In Washington, political rivals put aside decades of disagreement. In Lagos, community leaders connected with global resource managers. In Moscow, economic strategists worked alongside environmental experts. Dr. Akira Tanaka monitored the global response, his fingers racing across holographic interfaces. "It's not just about solving the problem," he muttered. "It's about how we solve it." The artifact pulsed in synchronization with the global effort. Every successful collaboration, every moment of genuine cooperation, caused its crystalline structures to shift and change. Marcus moved closer to the observation window. His eyes, no longer fully human, reflected complex patterns of information that seemed to shift with every breath. "Collective potential," he repeated, "not individual achievement." As the hours ticked down, the world transformed. Nations that had been on the brink of conflict found themselves working together. Economic systems began to realign. Resource distribution became a global priority. Elena understood something fundamental was happening. This was more than a test. This was a transformation. With 1 hour remaining, the global system teetered on a knife's edge. Some regions struggled. Some teams faltered. But something remarkable was emerging, a level of human cooperation never before witnessed. "We are being evaluated," Marcus said, his voice a complex harmony of human and alien tones. "Not for our individual capabilities, but for our collective potential." The final minutes approached. The simulated environmental catastrophe hung in the balance. Millions of humans worked as a single, interconnected system, not as separate nations, not as competing interests, but as a unified potential. Somewhere in the vast darkness of space, something was watching, evaluating, waiting. As the final moments ticked down, humanity held its collective breath. The Horizon Research Station hung in space, a tiny bubble of human potential, about to discover whether it was ready to take its first step into a larger universal community. The timer approached zero. The test was about to conclude. The moment of truth arrived in absolute silence. Dr. Elena Rodriguez held her breath as the final seconds of the global challenge ticked away. The Horizon Research Station seemed to vibrate with anticipation, a tiny bubble of human potential suspended in the infinite darkness of space. Marcus Chen, now a living bridge between human consciousness and something far beyond, stood perfectly still. His body, a complex network of crystal and flesh, pulsed with an energy that defied human understanding. The simulation's timer reached zero. For 3 heartbeats, nothing happened. Then everything changed. The artifact in its containment chamber began to transform. Crystalline structures shifted and realigned, creating patterns that spoke of intelligence far beyond human comprehension. Marcus's body moved in perfect synchronization, his form becoming increasingly translucent. Touching was never about physical contact, Marcus said, his voice a complex harmony of human and alien tones. It was about understanding. Global communication systems erupted with a cascade of information. Not data, not simple messages, but a profound revelation that simultaneously appeared to every human on Earth. Humanity had passed the test. Not through individual brilliance, not through technological might, but through something far more fundamental, the capacity to transcend individual limitations, to work as a single, interconnected system, to choose collective survival over individual interest. Dr. Akira Tanaka watched in awe as complex holographic displays showed the global response to the environmental challenge. Every nation had contributed. Every community had played a part. The simulation's most critical moments had been solved through unprecedented levels of cooperation. We were never just being observed, Lydia Okoye realized. We were being invited. The artifact began to dissolve. Not destructively, but transformatively. Its crystalline structures spread across the research station's containment chamber, creating intricate patterns that seemed to breathe with intelligence. Marcus approached Elena, his form now more energy than matter. Humanity's greatest strength, he said, is the ability to touch what cannot be touched, to understand beyond your current limitations. Around the world, people experienced a moment of collective consciousness. For just an instant, every human felt connected, understood, part of something far larger than themselves. The Horizon Research Station began to change. Its metallic walls became translucent, revealing complex structures that seemed to merge technology and living intelligence. The boundary between the human-made station and the artifact blurred. This is not an ending, Marcus continued. This is a beginning. Glimpses of a larger universe appeared, not through screens or holographic displays, but directly in human consciousness. Civilizations beyond imagination. Cosmic structures that defied human understanding. A community of intelligent life far more complex and interconnected than anyone had ever dreamed. Elena understood now. The artifact was never a threat. It was an invitation to join something greater. As Marcus's form finally dissolved, his last message resonated through every communication system. Humanity, it is now ready to be there. The Horizon Research Station hung in space, no longer just a human construct, but a bridge to something extraordinary. Somewhere in the vast darkness of space, something watched. Not with judgment, but with welcome.